So let us start our second session, and let me introduce Amy Pawlicki, who is a director with the AICPA, and she's going to present an update on AICPA Assurance Services Executive Committee activities.
Thank you, Alex. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. Morning, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here today. I think this is really exciting. I've been at many of these over the years, and it's great to see so many people in the room. I work for the AICPA team that is responsible basically for looking at emerging trends in reporting and assurance and making sure that the auditing and accounting profession remains relevant in a changing world. We do both the reporting and assurance side, but today I'll be focusing on the assurance side. And I know we're a little bit behind, but in honor of the fact that the ticker tape parade just kicked off across the river, I couldn't resist putting up a picture of my favorite Yankees fan. Although he'd be the first to admit, I think the hat's more of a fashion statement. He fell asleep 10 minutes into the championship game the other night, so what are you going to do? But he looks good, doesn't he? All right, so let's get to work. So what I'm going to do today is go through an overview of the new projects that the Assurance Services Executive Committee is working on. This is a committee that's been around for a long time. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It was previously chaired by Bob Elliott. This is the group that developed the trust services principles and criteria. It went on hiatus for a little while when we had Sarbanes-Oxley, and we reconstituted it a couple of years ago. And we have quite a few work streams rather, that are going on right now that I'm actually quite proud of. The purpose of this committee is, unlike the ASB, which focuses more on traditional audit services and what's happening and what's needed right now, the purpose of ASEC is really to look to the future and, as I said before, maintain the relevance of the auditing profession in a changing world. So it's really a fun committee to work with. I am quite proud of the work streams that we have going on right now, although I'm sure at the end of this presentation, Miklos will challenge me, as he always does, and say that we're still 20 years behind. But I'm still proud of what we're doing. We have 4 major projects going. I'm going to walk you through each one of these and the highlights of what we're working on in each one of these areas. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the original major project of the Assurance Services Executive Committee was to develop system reliability principles and criteria. And many of you probably remember the service marks, SysTrust and WebTrust. Those are still out there being maintained by CICA, but mainly what we're focused on today is maintaining the principles and criteria of that system reliability framework, which is still highly relevant. And the Assurance Services Executive Committee just recently went through an update of that framework, and that is available through our professional publications. A great example of how it can be applied today and will be applied very soon is a special project that we're working on together with the ASB, who is also working with the IAASB on the service organization working group. And what they're doing is they're developing an SSAE that focuses on engagements to report on controls at a service organization as they relate to controls over financial reporting. At the same time, the second paragraph of that document actually states very clearly that the SSAE might also be useful for providing, or for reporting rather, on controls over system reliability for systems that don't just cover financial reporting, also for non-financial reporting. So this is a great opportunity. The group is developing an SOP that will help practitioners to utilize the SSAE and also the trust services principles and criteria for system reliability to perform these new engagements. Another thing that the Data Integrity Task Force is working on, and this is probably the most exciting project, is information integrity principles and criteria, and it is about time. We've been talking about this for so many years. We've had the system reliability criteria out there, but we never had the complementary piece, which is the data integrity principles and criteria, which are just becoming more and more important, as you heard this morning, as we move to more of an online electronic reporting model. So right now, they have actually made quite a bit of progress. They're building on the CICA's Information Integrity Control Guideline that was written by Ephraim Borowitz, which is basically a conceptual framework for how to identify risks related to information integrity, and then how to design and implement controls accordingly. And so right now what the task force is doing is they're starting to develop criteria related to the different risks that you might see across the information lifecycle, from the event phase to the recording phase to the reporting phase. Finally, and actually the most exciting part about this, I think, is the timeline. I think we expected that would take a long, long time. They're actually hoping to get something done, at least an exposure draft, by the end of this year, calendar year. It may be as late as June, but that's still probably much sooner than I would have anticipated that they'd be able to have that done. And I think this is going to be of great interest, not just in the US, but also to the international community, which I know in Japan, for example, in Europe, they've also been struggling with data integrity and how to address that. The other task force that we have under the Assurance Services Executive Committee is the XBRL Assurance Task Force. This group was put in place a couple of years ago in anticipation of the SEC mandating XBRL, which of course they have since done for public company submissions to the SEC. A couple of things that have made this challenging, even though it is necessary. The SEC rules for XBRL tagging do not require any auditor involvement on XBRL tag data. This is a problem because tagging documents in XBRL is no different than mapping or preparing financial statements, because judgment is involved in much the same way. And so right now we have a situation where you've got XBRL exhibits being submitted to the SEC. The whole point of those is that that's what's going to be consumed by users, otherwise why do it? And yet that is not necessarily the same information as what is reported in the paper-based financial statements taken as a whole. So we have a disconnect and an expectation gap problem. And that's what the XBRL Assurance Task Force is working on addressing. Even though it's not mandated, auditors can voluntarily, companies can voluntarily request to have some kind of service to look at the accuracy of their tag data. And so we're working to address that need. The first thing we did was kind of a general communication that came out at the same time as the SEC final rules on XBRL, which was in the form of a CAQ Alert. It's actually now publicly available. It's no longer just available to the CAQ members at the PCAOB's request. So this document covers, you know, kind of what are all the different alternatives for providing some kind of assurance or verifying in some manner the accuracy of XBRL tag data. It ranges from advisory services, assurance services, and also covers how the auditor might want to revise their report to address the expectation gap issue. At least preliminarily, that document suggests that the auditor might want to consider being very explicit about what they did do. Not to disclaim on the XBRL, but to be very explicit about what they did cover as at least an initial step. The Assurance Task Force also released this year the SOP on performing agreed upon procedures engagements for XBRL tag data. This is actually getting quite a bit of uptake. A lot of the major firms are getting requests to perform AUPs for the preliminary furnishings that public companies in the first phase are already providing to the SEC. Right now, this is a particularly good option because it's not as extensive as an examination engagement. It's just between management and the auditor. So AICPA had jurisdiction to get this out, which is great. And it's also a wonderful basis for future examination level engagements, which I personally think are going to be demanded once the limited liability phase goes away. Right now, companies aren't, their XBRL submissions are just that. They're submissions, they're not filings, and they don't carry full liability, but in 2 years they will, and I can't imagine that the filers themselves won't be demanding a little more rigorous engagement on their XBRL tag data, especially as it relates to the 10K. So we anticipate that that will be the case, and so we are working on the examination side to develop management assertions. They do build on what's in the AUP document, but then obviously go to procedures since you can apply judgment in the examination space. We are working together with the SEC and PCAOB. They're observing our meetings. We're sharing all of our documentation with them.